Good morning. I'm not your host, I'm your pastor. Thank you, Harry. I appreciate you. Yes. Hey, listen, I hope you're getting excited about Easter. We're super pumped about Easter services around here. And so please plan on coming out and being a part of those services and invite somebody to come with you. We're just doing one service, 9 a.m., because we have the ability to expand our auditorium. And so we'll have extra seats out and all that, so we know it's going to be extra crowded, but hopefully the extra seats will make it still feel nice and cozy here on Easter Sunday morning, okay? So plan on being here and inviting somebody to come with you. Again, my name's Steve. I am one of your pastors here at Sunlight, and I get the privilege of sharing God's Word with you today, which is the reason why we're here, and we're really excited about that. I want to welcome anybody watching online. Thanks for joining us today, wherever you might be. We appreciate you being there. I know some people are watching today because they're sick at home, and so, hey, we're praying for you and your families that are sick, and we're praying for them. But we're just glad that you're joining us, even virtually. We appreciate that. Have you ever run out of something at like a really inapt time, like just the most inconvenient thing at all? I'm not talking about like running out of something at home where it's kind of convenient there, but I'm talking about when it matters. Like you run out of gas on the way to an important meeting, that kind of running out. Or maybe it's your phone runs out of battery right when you need to use maps to get to a meeting of that sort. Or maybe it's like everybody's probably biggest fear that they have in their life. You run out of toilet paper in a public restroom, right? That is the biggest fear of all. Some of you are like, I don't even use public restrooms. I get that as well. But listen, you run out, right? It's a terrible situation. But maybe it's something deeper than that. Maybe it's you run out of words in the middle of a hard conversation. Maybe you run out of patience with your kids. Anybody been there? Maybe this morning? Maybe you run out of margin in your schedule. Or maybe you run out of energy because you're trying to hold everything together. Maybe you run out of joy. You're not even really sure when that happened. I think for some of us, I think maybe this song could be like the mantra of our lives. Go ahead and hit it for us there, Zachariah. I'm not going to sing it for you, but how many of you heard that song? How many of you have never heard that song? I thought everybody in the world had heard this song, and then I asked our worship leader, Harry, and he's like, I don't know what that song is. And so then I started panicking that nobody would know what that song was. But that was the song. It came out in the 70s. That's before my time, just so you know. But this song, it came out in the 70s, and it really became a popular hit, and I think it still resonates with people today because it's a song that speaks about running on empty, being exhausted, running on exhaustion, physically, emotionally, spiritually. It's just, that's where people are at. And it's about this idea of, I'm running on empty, but I'm still pushing forward. That's the idea behind the song. And I think it speaks into this life where we can be achieving a lot, but we still feel empty inside. And the truth is that I probably would imagine most of us, we don't even notice it immediately. We just keep going. We keep smiling, we keep showing up, we keep doing all the right things, and we're doing all of the things externally, but man, inside, quietly, something has run dry, and we're running on empty. And here's the thing about that. I think we're probably like in a society, we don't like to admit this because, man, running out exposes us. When we start to say, man, I'm out of it. I am empty. I've got no more patience with my kids. I've got no more margin in my schedule. I've got no more joy in my life. That's exposing to us. And so I think a lot of us, we just like to keep running on empty. But the truth is that running on empty, it reminds us that what we thought would be enough can never fully satisfy. We're starting a new series today. It's a series called Miracles. Over the next few months, we're going to slow down and we're going to look at some of these supernatural moments of Jesus. But here's the thing, we're not just looking at supernatural moments. We're actually going to ask a deeper question through this series. We're going to ask this question, what do these miracles reveal about who Jesus is? It's more than just the spectacle, if you will. Every miracle is more than just some moment of power. It's actually a window into the heart of Jesus. And today's miracle that we're going to look at and we're going to start with is the first miracle. It's a miracle about running out. It's found in the Gospel of John, and John takes us to this wedding in a small village called Cana. So it's a celebration. It's a room full of people. There's music, there's laughter, there's rituals and traditions, and everything seems externally to be perfectly in place. But then they run out of wine. It's actually just a small sentence in the story there in John chapter number 2. It's a very small sentence. It just says they have no more wine. But man, in that culture, that's a big deal. For some of you, that's a big deal. But they run out of wine. And in that culture, that's disaster. To run out of wine in the middle of a wedding, it brings embarrassment. It brings shame. It cuts the wedding celebration short. And it's in this wedding disaster where they run out of wine that becomes the setting for Jesus' very first miracle. You've probably heard of this miracle. Even if you're not familiar with church, if you're not familiar with the Bible, you've heard of this idea that Jesus turned water into wine. You've probably seen the memes, where like Jesus and the disciples are at the bar and Jesus is like, we'll just take 12 waters. And then all the disciples are like laughing, because they know he's going to turn it into wine and they're going to get it for free. But we've seen the memes, right? We understand. We know this miracle of Jesus turning water into wine. But I want you to know that in John's gospel, throughout his entire gospel, every miracle that Jesus performed is actually called a sign. And I think that's important for us because a sign points somewhere, right? It's pointing, it's revealing something for us. And that's what these miracles are doing. They're revealing to us who Jesus is. So here's the question for us today. As we dive in and we begin to study these miracles and look at these signs of Jesus, here's the question. When something runs out in your life, where do you turn? What do you do? So this morning, I want us all to be wedding crashers. All right? We're going to walk into this wedding at Cana. It's found in John chapter 2, it's the first 11 verses there. If you want to use one of the Bibles in the seats in front of you there, it's page 1511. But we're going to walk into this wedding in Cana. We're going to see what happens when Jesus steps into a moment of lack. John, when he opens up in chapter 2, verse number 1, John tells us, it says, on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. It's almost understated here. There's no dramatic build-up. There's no thunder from heaven. It's just a wedding in a small town. But I do think that matters in this story. Because what we're going to see here is that Jesus' first miracle, it doesn't happen in Jerusalem in the temple. It doesn't happen in front of the religious elites. No. It happens at a small village in Cana, in Galilee, at a wedding for just a young couple. I don't want to say a bunch of nobodies, but it's not anybody of any power or influence. So it's just a normal celebration. A joyful everyday moment. But I want you to notice this. Jesus was invited. He was invited to this. He wasn't crashing the party like we are today. He wasn't forcing his way into this wedding. He was welcomed there. He was invited to be there. And I think before we rush past that, we ought to sit on that for a moment. Because this miracle that's about to unfold, it began with an invitation for Jesus to be present. You see, Jesus goes where he's welcomed. He walks into those spaces. He steps into spaces where he's wanted. And in this story, before the crisis happens, before there's a miracle, before there's a revelation of his glory, there's an open door invitation for Jesus to be present. And I think that raises a gentle question for us today. Is Jesus simply a part of your religious background? Or is he actually invited into your life? I think that's important for us. Because at Cana, everything that follows begins with this reality that Jesus was there. He was present. Now, as we move through the story here in John chapter 2, John, he then gives us the tension. He gives us the situation of what's going on. Look there in verse number 3. It says, when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. That's it. Again, it's not dramatic. There's no panic in the text here. It's just a quiet statement from Jesus' mother to Jesus saying, there's no wine. But again, in the first century Jewish world, this isn't a minor inconvenience, because weddings were these like big multi-day celebrations, and hospitality by the groom's family was everything. They were to provide the food and the wine in abundance. They were not to run out. So running out of wine wasn't just awkward. It was humiliating. It meant that the groom's family had failed publicly. It meant that the joy of the celebration had now collapsed into embarrassment. In other words, the party's going, but they know that something's about to drop, right? There's about to be this moment of panic and issue. The joy had quietly run out. And maybe that's the part that hits home with you, because you're running on empty. And the joy has quietly run out in your life. Oh, you're still doing all the things. You're still running through the motions. You're still checking the boxes and getting things done. But inside, something's empty. Something has run out. The music might be still playing on the outside. The guests might still be dancing. But inside, there's panic. Something has run dry. The energy's gone, the margin's gone, the joy's gone, the peace has run out. Here's what I love about this moment. Mary doesn't make like this big speech, right? Mary doesn't offer the solution. She simply brings the lack. She brings the need to Jesus. She says they have no more wine. Just a simple, honest, unpolished statement of the crisis. And that's where the miracle begins. Not with some big spectacle, but with someone bringing the emptiness into the presence of Jesus. Oh, that's important to know. Jesus responds in verse number 4 in a way that can kind of feel surprising to us and maybe even harsh. Look what he says. He says, woman, why do you involve me? That seems really harsh. Like he's talking to his mama. Like, why would you do that, right? But listen, he's not being rude in this moment. Actually, the term woman in that culture was actually a sign of respect. It would be like us saying, hey, ma'am, could you help me? That's what Jesus is saying here. So it seems really kind of harsh to us here, but Jesus is not he's being very formal and respectful here. And something begins to shift. You see, Mary comes to Jesus as his mother, but Jesus responds to Mary as the Messiah. He says, what does this have to involve me? You notice the next words? My hour has not come. In John's gospel, that term, the hour, he's talking about one thing. He's talking about the cross. He's talking about the moment of Jesus' suffering, the moment of his glorification, his ultimate mission, and why he was on the earth to begin with. So here at a wedding in a small village, Jesus is operating still on divine timing. He's not reacting to social pressure in this moment here. He's actually moving according to his Father's plan. And here he doesn't walk away from this situation. Mary turns to the servants in verse number 5. I think this is a crazy reaction. Jesus says, woman, what does this involve me? My hour's not yet come. Mary doesn't say another word to him. She just looks at the servants and is like, do whatever he says. You know, it's almost like she's still in mom mode, you know, and Jesus is like, hey, what's this got to do with me? And she's like, do what he says. You know, like, I'm his mom, he's going to do this. Like, you know, it's an interesting statement here. But she says, do whatever he tells you. Now, fun fact, these are the last recorded words of the mother of Jesus in Scripture. And I think it's profound because she doesn't argue. She doesn't push. What does she do? She trusts. She speaks of obedience. There's tension in the room, right? This is a real need of what's going on in this situation. The timing here seems very uncertain, but Mary anchors herself in obedience. And that's often how miracles unfold. It's not with us having control. It's not with us having clarity. But it's us simply trusting, doing whatever he tells us to do. John then writes in verses 6, I almost hate to say this, and 7. Here, John writes these words, and I think these are important for us to understand. He says, nearby stood six stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water, so they filled them to the brim. Now, I think if we're just reading quickly, we might skim over these verses here. But man, when I began to study this and look at this, man, God just opened up my eyes to some things. And that's where I want to focus in here on these verses and just share with you what God showed me in my study of this passage here, because I think it's absolutely fascinating here. The question I began to have was this: why does John give us so much detail about these water jars? Why would he do that? I don't think that John is trying to waste details here. He gives us the number of the pots. He gives us the material that the pots are made for. He gives us the original purpose of what these pots are. He tells us the capacity of what these pots are. I'm telling you, John is being intentional here. There's no other reason for him to give us all of these details about water jars, unless he wants us to learn something here. He wants us to see something. First, notice the number. There's 6 of them, not 7. In Scripture, 7 often symbolizes fullness or completion, but 6 obviously would fall short of that, right? Now, John doesn't explicitly interpret the number for us here. So we don't want to build like a whole doctrine on this and what's going on here. But I think narratively, it's hard to miss the symbolism. That there's 6, not 7. 6 is the number of man. 6 is the number of completion. 7 is the number of fullness and completion. And so what we have here falls short. Something is present, but it's not complete. Something exists, but it's not enough. 6 equals incomplete. Second, he gives us the material. He makes sure to tell us that they're stone water jars. These are not clay jars. They were stone. And that matters because stone vessels were considered to be ritually pure. According to Jewish purity laws, stone pots did not contract ceremonial uncleanness the way that clay jars would. And so I think that's why John adds that it's the kind that the Jews used for ceremonial washing. These jars were not just decorative jars. They were tied to Israel's covenant life. They held water that was used for purification, water to wash people's hands before meals, to remove ritual defilement. It was water that prepared people to participate in community and worship. They represented the old covenant system of cleansing. The stone pots were the old covenant. And so here's the tension. The system was there, but the wine was gone. The jars stood nearby, these solid, lawful, religiously appropriate jars, and yet they could not solve the crisis at hand. They needed wine, not water pots. They could wash hands. They could prepare people for meals, but they could not sustain the joy of the wedding. And I think that carries some theological weight for us as we walk through this. So here's what I think John is showing us in these details. I think that John is showing us that the law was good. The Old Testament purification rituals, they were God-given back then. They served a purpose, but they were never meant to be ultimate. They were preparatory, and they always pointed forward. They pointed people to something better. Listen, water for external cleansing was always meant to anticipate something deeper. And notice here what Jesus does. He doesn't smash the jars. He doesn't condemn the system. He doesn't ignore those things. No, verse number 7, did you catch what he said? He said, fill them. We're going to use those. He uses the very vessels that represented the old way of cleansing. Now we're talking about covenant language here. You see, throughout John's gospel, Jesus fulfills and surpasses Jewish institutions. See, you think about the temple, you think about the festivals, you think about the sacrificial system. Jesus surpassed all of that. And here at the very beginning of Jesus' public ministry, what does he do? He steps into the image of purification. What he ultimately came to do for us. And so the servants fill the jars. Again, John gives us a detail here that I think often we want to skip past. It says they filled them to the brim. They filled them all the way up. There's no space left in these. And I think that matters to us. One, I think practically it just shows that there's no room for additives. Nothing can be added into this. There's no trickery. There's no dilution. Whatever happens next with these stone water jars full of water to the brim was going to be unmistakable. Second, I think it matters to us because fullness precedes transformation. The jars are completely full before the miracle unfolds. Now, think about the scale of what's going on here. These were 6 jars. John gives us the details that they were roughly 100, and they were roughly 20 to 30 gallons each. So if there's 6 of them, we do the math. That's 120 to 180 gallons of water. That is massive. We're not talking about some like kitchen pitcher of water that's going on here. No, we're talking about industrial level purification water. The Old Covenant cleansing system is represented in abundance. But notice, it is still insufficient to address the deeper lack in the root. They need wine. So here's what's happening beneath the surface. The water represents ritual purification. Those stone jars represent the covenant structure of external cleansing. The number hints at us that it's incomplete. The fullness of the jars highlights the limits of the system. And right here's where Jesus steps in. Again, not to discard it, but to fulfill it. He's not there to shame it, but to transform it. These are not just random containers. These are theological signposts that is pointing to something greater. They stand there as silent witnesses to a system that could wash hands but could never change hearts. And what happens next? We'll quietly announce that something, or maybe better yet, someone greater has arrived. Jesus tells the servants there in verse number 8, if you look, he says, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. Can you imagine that walk with the servants? They filled those stone jars with water. They dipped the cup in of water. They were carrying water to the master of the banquet. They expected the master of the banquet to drink water. But man, look what happens. When the master of the banquet takes a drink of what the servants thought was water, he is stunned, which they all are. They're stunned at this. Look what he says there in verse number 10. It says, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have drunk too much. But you have saved the best till now. That water became wine. But not just any wine. It became the best. It's not average. It's not barely passable as wine. It's not, well, man, we averted the crisis type of wine. It's the best. And here's what's fascinating. The master of the banquet doesn't know where it came from. The groom probably doesn't even know where it came from. The guests at the wedding do not know where this wine came from. But the servants do. John makes sure that we see that detail too. You see, this miracle wasn't performed for the spotlight. It wasn't announced with trumpets. It wasn't validated by the religious elite. It was the ones who knew were the ones who obeyed. The servants who filled the jar to the brim. The servants who dipped into what looked like ordinary water. The servants who carried, trembling, thinking they were about to give this guy water, but they were just doing it in faith. They knew what was going on. And that's often how Jesus works in our lives. The crowds enjoy the blessings. The skeptic critiques the timing. The religious leader takes the result. But the ones who step out in obedience, they're the ones who get to see the transformation up close. But think about what just happened theologically. Those stone jars represented external cleansing, ritual washing. It represented the religion. It represented effort. It represented the law. And so Jesus takes water that was meant for external purification and he turns it into celebratory abundance. He doesn't just fix a social embarrassment. Jesus actually reveals what he came to do. He transforms what is empty into something overflowing. He transforms what is external into something that's joyful. He transforms what is ordinary into something extraordinary. And notice the abundance of it. 6 jars. 120 to 180 gallons of wine. Listen, this isn't just enough. This is lavish grace that Jesus is pouring out to this wedding. This is the heart of the gospel. Because where sin increased, grace increased all the more. Where shame threatened, glory stepped in. Where religion ran dry, Jesus brought life. And the best wine was saved for now. And that line, listen, it's more than just describing flavor. Not because the groom planned well. Not because the guest even deserved it. Planned well. Not because the guest even deserved it. But because Jesus was there. And that's still true today. When Jesus steps into emptiness, he doesn't patch it. He completely transforms it. When Jesus steps into lack, he doesn't ration grace. He pours it out. And the world might not always understand it. But those who obey him, we know. And that's exactly what these stone jars are teaching us. They were ordinary, empty, incomplete, but yet Jesus stepped into them and he did something extraordinary with it. And he didn't just fix a problem, he revealed his glory. I think there's some profound truths that we can learn from these stone jars. And you're like, whoa, all of that was just the introduction? No, I'll be short here. I think there's 3 profound truths that we can learn from these stone jars with all the detail that John gives us. Number 1 is this, is that Jesus fills what is lacking. Those 6 stone jars weren't decorative, they were functional, right? They were there for ceremonial washing, part of the Jewish purification system, rooted in the law of Moses. Before meals, before worship, after contact with anything that was considered unclean, they would use this water to wash their hands, to cleanse themselves, to deal with the impurities in their life. But the thing is this, is that the water could wash the dirt off of their skin, but it could never wash sin out of their hearts. It symbolized cleansing, but it couldn't accomplish transformation. And so I believe Jesus intentionally chose those jars. He doesn't grab some random bucket. He doesn't grab clay jars. He doesn't grab the empty wine jars that were there before. No, he doesn't even create new ones. He uses these stone ones, these stone jars that were the very symbols of the old system. And he fills them with something entirely new. Man, this is fulfillment theology in motion. Because in the Old Testament, the cleansing was external and repetitive, right? You had to wash and then wash again and then wash again and again. You were never finally clean. And so when Jesus turns that water into wine, he is quietly declaring that this old system has reached its climax. The shadow is now giving way to substance. What religion could only point toward, Jesus now embodies it. The law prepared us, the rituals anticipated, the prophets foretold it, but now the bridegroom has arrived. This miracle isn't just about saving a wedding from embarrassment. It's about announcing a new covenant reality. Listen, cleansing won't come through water poured over hands. It will come through the blood poured out on the cross. That's what's going to bring our cleansing. The jars weren't discarded. They were fulfilled. And that's what Jesus does. He doesn't abolish God's promises. He fulfills them. Second profound truth is this, is that Jesus transforms what is ordinary. Notice what Jesus does. He doesn't add to the water, right? He doesn't enhance it. He doesn't flavor it. He doesn't dilute it with something that's present there for them. No, he transforms the ordinary. The water becomes wine. The substance changed. The nature changed. The identity of it all changed. And listen, I think this is critical for us in understanding the gospel, is that Jesus didn't just come to make bad people slightly better. That's not what he came to do. He didn't come to sprinkle inspiration onto some exhausted religious system. He didn't come to offer us some kind of self-improvement types. No, Jesus came to bring transformation into our lives. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17, it says, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. That's Cana language. That's this wedding language. Water to wine, old to new, external to internal, ritual to relationship. The miracle happened invisibly. No one saw the molecular shift that took place in there. There was no countdown. There was no spectacle. It was just quiet, sovereign power. And that's so often how Jesus works. The world might not see the exact moment that grace takes hold. They may not see when the bitterness softens. They might not see when the shame lifts or when desires shift. But we know that something changes. The heart's not patched. It's renewed. And notice this, the water didn't gradually ferment into wine, right? There was no time for that. It didn't evolve over time. It changed because Jesus willed it to change. Listen to me, church. Transformation in the Christian life is not self-generated. It's Christ-generated. You don't engineer your own miracle. You obey. You trust. You fill the jars as a servant. And then Jesus does what only Jesus can do. Third profound truth is this. Jesus always gives more than enough. Again, talk about the abundance here. 6 jars, 20, 30 gallons, 120, 180 gallons of wine. This wasn't just some polite solution to appease some people. This was abundance. This is way more than what they needed. And not just abundance, but the best in abundance. That's some theological detail for us, because listen, under normal circumstances, the best wine in the wedding would come first, but then once everybody's palates have dulled because they've been drinking so much, then the cheap stuff comes out. But here, the best is saved for last. John is showing us here something about the nature of Jesus' kingdom. He's showing us that God is not stingy. He's showing us that God is not reluctant. That God is not just scraping together some leftovers to help you out. Listen to me. When Jesus steps into your lap, he doesn't measure grace with a teaspoon. He pours it in abundance. That's what we need. This abundance echoes Old Testament prophecy. There's passages in Amos chapter 9 that write where the mountains will drip with new wine. And wine symbolized joy and blessing in the age of the Messiah. So when Jesus floods a wedding with the best wine, Jesus is saying, hey, I'm here. Fulfillment has begun. Grace isn't barely sufficient. It overflows. And here's the beautiful irony of it. The groom and his family get the credit. The guests celebrate. The master marvels over this best wine. But the abundance came from Jesus. That's the gospel. Right? We bring emptiness. He brings fullness. We bring the need. He brings the abundance. And the best in Christ, it's not behind us. It's here now. John, he closes the scene with some clarity for us here. Verse number 11, look what he says. This was the first of the signs. He revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Again, John doesn't call it a miracle. He calls it a sign because he's pointing beyond this miracle itself. The wine mattered, but that wasn't the point. The abundance mattered, but that's not the destination, right? The rescue from embarrassment mattered, but that wasn't the ultimate goal here. The goal of this miracle, the goal of this sign was the revelation. He revealed his glory. Not loud glory, not some Mount Sinai thunder from heaven type of glory, not some kind of blinding light on the road to Damascus type of glory. No, this was a wedding glory. It was quiet glory, but it was transforming glory. The kind of glory that turns water into wine and skeptics into disciples. Did you see the result there? It says his disciples believed in him. Can I tell you that's the purpose of every miracle Jesus performed? Not amazement, not applause, but faith in him. That was the purpose. The miracle wasn't about the wine. It was about knowing Jesus. And here's where it lands for us. You can know the jars. You can know the rituals. You can know the culture. Listen, you can grow up around church. You can grow up around worship. You can know all of the Christian language and how to get yourself around. But the ultimate question is, do you know him? That's the ultimate question. Because when you know him, your lack is filled. When you know him, the ordinary is transformed. And when you know him, grace is abundant. The greatest miracle at Cana wasn't in the jars. It was in the hearts of the disciples who believed in him. They saw his glory, and they believed. Man, listen, we started today talking about what it feels like to run on empty. About running out of patience and joy, running out of hope. We imagine the embarrassment and the quiet desperation of a moment when what we thought would be enough isn't fulfilling. And that's exactly the moment that Jesus stepped into in this wedding at Cana. The jars were empty. The wine had run out. The party was at risk. But it was into that space that he brought transformation, abundance, and the very best. Again, this miracle wasn't about the wine. It wasn't even about the water. It was about revealing himself, showing his glory, and inviting people to believe. And maybe that's your moment today. Maybe there's something in your life that's quietly run dry. Maybe you've been going through all of the motions. You've been attending and performing and following the rules and all this, but yet you have never experienced the fullness that only Christ can offer. Listen to me, Jesus, he's not just here to fix or patch what's broken. He's here to fulfill what's lacking in your life. He's here to transform what seems so ordinary in your life. And he's here to give and to pour out grace that is way more than enough. He wants to do that for you today. So here's your invitation. Bring him your empty jars. Let him do a miracle in your life today. Let him reveal his glory to you. Let him transform your routine. Let him transform your religion, your incompleteness into something that is overflowing with the best that life could offer. A life that can only be satisfied in him. Church, let's pray.